Now, so welcome to Be Well Live. My name is Mike. I am a sport coordinator in the Athletic and Recreation Department at Seneca College. This is Try It Thursdays, which is our first of many daily themed videos that we'll be bringing to you. Our recreation staff will be leading these sessions for you like we did in the spring and the summer. And Try It Thursdays, we're going to kind of incorporate unique ideas or kind of general health and fitness tips. Okay, so for today, for Try It Thursdays, is a fairly basic and old school, I guess, assessment tool, which is to measure your resting heart rate, or any heart rate for that matter, but without using any monitor or device. So manually, old school, okay? Obviously, most smartwatches and heart rate monitors are fairly accessible, and a lot of people use those during their workouts. But it's a really valuable tool to be able to measure your own heart rate manually and calculate it. Okay, it can be very valuable when you're monitoring your health or your workouts. Okay, so. There are, first you're going to need either a stopwatch or some kind of smartwatch, which will have a stopwatch option, or a clock, an old-fashioned clock, or a device or a phone that you'll be using during your workout. All have the option to use a stopwatch. Okay. In this case, I will use the smartwatch, which has that stopwatch option. Other than that, that's all you're going to need. So obviously you can't count the beats that you will be counting for your pulse and counting the time at the same time. You just aren't able to do that as a human flaw. So you'll mix the two and they'll interfere with each other. So make sure that you have something to count the beats. Okay? So there are two popular methods among many to measure your resting heart rate or your active heart rate, and that is your radial pulse, so on your wrist, or your carotid, which is just on your neck. Sorry, watch the headphones there. Just kind of next to your trachea or your windpipe, below the jawline, and that's how you'll get your carotid pulse as well. So if you have trouble with the wrist or with the neck one, then you can try both, or just kind of palpate around until you find the pulse. Okay, so what you're going to do is we're going to stick with those two. There are a few other different methods of measuring your heart rate. Pretty much any limb for that matter, commonly on the foot, also known as a pedal heart rate zone, or even the brachial artery, which is located near the elbow, which is popular and common for healthcare practitioners using on children, so in pediatrics. So in this case, for an adult, we're going to use the radial on the wrist and the carotid. Okay? So what you're going to need to do is just your two fingers, so your middle finger and your index finger. We'll start with the radial, so you're going to have your wrist palm up, and you're going to place those two fingers below the base of the hand in line with the thumb, and you're going to kind of place that on the edge there. And I know it's kind of hard to see in this frame, and you don't want to apply too much pressure. Okay, and you want to make sure that your thumb isn't coming into contact, because your thumb can actually have its own pulse. It's very faint, but it can interfere when you're measuring the radial pulse with the two fingers. So try to make sure that thumb is not involved. Okay, so placing those two fingers again at the base of the hand in line with the thumb, this is your radial pulse. And you're not pressing too hard, and you want to kind of feel around for that pulse. You'll feel that heartbeat. Okay, so I have mine. So what you'll do is, beforehand, is you will start your stopwatch. Okay, and what you want to do is when you hit start, you're going to do a 15-second count. Okay, so you're going to count how many beats, you're going to measure how many beats in 15 seconds. Okay, so let's say we're doing this now, and we're going to count that. Now let's just say 15 seconds have passed. And then you're going to remember how many you felt, okay? And what you're going to do is you're going to multiply that by 4, okay? So 15 seconds, and how many beats you've counted. So let's say you counted 15 beats, and you're going to multiply that number by 4. That is your resting heart rate. Okay? So it's the same thing with the carotid pulse. So again, mind my cable here with my headphones, but again, it's just next to the windpipe, the trachea. The 2 fingers, the same 2 fingers we use for the radial, and it's just right in there. And you're going to wait until you feel that. Sometimes it's harder to locate it here. Sometimes it's easier for some people. But you're going to have it there. And then you found it. And you can feel that right on your fingers. And again, you're going to set your stopwatch. Obviously, this would be easier if someone was performing an assessment on you, but it's a manual assessment. So you are able to do it for yourself. If it's easier just to look at a clock at the second hand, then you can obviously see the 15 seconds. Okay, so what you're going to do is, again, you're going to multiply how many beats that you counted in that 15 seconds by 4, and that'll be your resting heart rate, so your beats per minute. Okay, so when you get that number, there's something you want to consider, and that is, well, is it a normal heart rate? What is normal? So typically anything between 60 and 100 beats per minute is a ideal or healthy resting heart rate. It is common in athletes, people who are in, let's say, better shape than the average sedentary person, to have it a little lower, on the lower end, even in the 50s or even the upper 40s for a resting heart rate. So mine is usually in the 60s. Again, it's in that normal range, and sometimes it can be spiked. So if you're experiencing any kind of anxiety or some form of stimulus, or if you're listening to certain music, that can maybe spike your resting heart rate. So typically, in order for this to be accurate, you do want to be sitting down, minimal movement, no speaking, and kind of maybe wait a couple minutes until you've calmed down to take that. Otherwise, the numbers will be skewed, and your resting heart rate will not be very accurate. Okay? Ideally, in a darker room with no distractions, that kind of thing. So, okay, for your true resting heart rate. And it's a good thing to do this on a regular basis, just to kind of see if there's any kind of stresses, things like that. Okay, so that's your resting heart rate. So we covered the radial pulse, how to take that with the 2 fingers below the thumb at the base of the hand, and the carotid. Okay, and then a couple other things to note once you have this skill. Once you're able to measure your pulse, what you can do is you can apply that to exercise. So what we would typically do is you would want to determine what your target heart rate is. So a target heart rate is an estimated heart rate range for recommended for exercising, and how intense your exercise should be based on that target heart rate, which is typically originating from your age. So what you'll do is you'll take 220, so the number 220, and you will subtract your age. So if you were 20 years old, then your estimated max heart rate is 200 beats per minute. Now, obviously, you should not be working out to the point where your heart rate reaches 200 beats per minute. That is excessive to be at 100%. And it's obviously even possible to go above that. It doesn't mean you will explode when you've reached that max. It's just an estimated value based on your age. Okay, so typically what you'll do is you'll do 220 minus your age. So if you're 20 years old, your estimated max is 200 beats per minute. Your target heart rate would be anywhere from 50 to 85% of that value, of that max. Okay, so for example, that would be 100 to 170 beats per minute. So 50 to 85% of your estimated max heart rate. So that's typically, an estimated range of where the average person, or even athletes for that matter, should be training, depending on how intense. So 50% would be obviously lower intense, 85 would be pretty high intense exercise. Okay. So it's just a good way to kind of monitor both your resting heart rate and obviously your active heart rate, or even recovery heart rate. So recovery heart rate would be how quickly you go from that, let's say 85%, back to your resting heart rate. And the quicker that recovery is, typically the more efficient your cardiovascular system is, and the better conditioned you are. Okay. So that's pretty much it. So that was our Try It Thursday. I know it might seem a little elementary, a little basic, but not everyone knows how to measure and calculate their heart rate, because I think with technology, we have the monitors to do it for us, but it's a good tool to use. And maybe even in emergency situations and things like that, it's just a good skill to have. Okay, so thanks for joining me for our Try It Thursday. So try that out on yourself. Make sure that you get used to where to place your fingers for your heart rate and for your pulse. And as you're doing your workouts, you can now measure your target heart rate and things like that. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a good rest of the day, and be well.